Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the latest episode of the Players NIL Industry Insider Podcast and our resident legal expert. I'd like to welcome back Cal Stein. Cal, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks so much, Mark. Thanks for having me back.
Well, it's an interesting time, and it's amazing how one story has changed the narrative about college athletics in the last, maybe about a week now. And we're talking about the young athlete, the quarterback at University of Nevada, Las Vegas, who, as I understand it, was a fifth-year senior, a graduate from Holy Cross up in your neck of the woods in Massachusetts. And without trying to step on the story, why don't you help us understand why is it a big story and how did we get here?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So it is certainly a big story. And, in my opinion, I think it's going to be a story that we see repeated again and again in the future in this NIL world that we live in for various reasons. The long and short of what happened is this player, after I think it was 4 games, after 3 or 4 games, they were off to a great start, won all of them, including some really big wins. And he ended his season. He said, "I'm not going to play anymore." There are some disputes about his NIL deal, what was promised to him, what was not given to him. But regardless, where that leaves this student athlete and the program is that he's going to go the rest of the year without playing college football for UNLV or for anyone. And UNLV is going to be without their quarterback because of this dispute over the NIL. And importantly, from my perspective, the player's desire, fairly and rightfully, in my view, to preserve his eligibility that he has remaining so that he can continue to play football and also be compensated for it.
Yeah, we've kind of seen an inkling of this, right, with athletes removing themselves from competition in bowl games in the last couple of years, typically associated with NFL draft status in football in particular, right? But let's go back. So we have a kid that played at a FCS school, or, probably what considered a low mid-major at Holy Cross. Sorry, Holy Cross fans, but it's not Alabama or Ohio State. But he took an opportunity to go somewhere for his fifth year of eligibility, presumably and reported publicly for an NIL deal. How did he engage in an NIL deal that didn't have a contract? Like, that seems like an obvious thing, but how do these things happen? Any idea?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Mark. I mean, since the beginning of NIL, that has been, I think, the standard advice for most student athletes is, look, get it in writing. But this was one of the fears that I think people rightly had about NIL. These student athletes don't always know the lay of the land. And here, for whatever reason, it seems as though this student athlete moved himself from Worcester, Massachusetts, which is right down the street from me, all the way to Las Vegas without having a written, signed, executed NIL deal. He did it based on a promise. And you don't want to be too hard on a kid for making a choice that he thought was good for him and trusting people at a new school or associated with a new school that he thought he could trust. But it seems as though that's what happened here, and there's become a disagreement about what was actually offered and what was actually promised and what wasn't. And the result of it is this player has stepped aside so that he can play again next year and get another chance to earn it. Hopefully, when he does so, he'll have learned a lesson and will get it in writing.
Yeah. Yeah, I wrote on my op-ed last week that, we're the adults in the room. Okay, so let's look at the parties involved in no particular order, but let's start with the school. Let's start with the athletic department. Should coaches be negotiating NIL deals?
Well, unfortunately, right now they really can't be. But your question is the right one to ask. Should they be? Should the coaches, should the athletic staff, should the schools themselves be able to be involved in these NIL negotiations and these NIL deals? And the NCAA thus far has said, no, that's not what the rule is. They can't be involved. It's got to be third parties. That said, Charlie Baker, the president of the NCAA, has been very clear that he is concerned about this, and he is concerned about creating a system of consumer protection for student athletes and their families. And at some point, I think in the very near future, we are going to have schools actually negotiating and entering into these NIL deals. And I think this is a pretty graphic example of why that is a better situation for pretty much everyone. I know it doesn't fit with the NCAA's traditional models, but those models are, I think, going to be gone altogether pretty soon. So if you're talking about a situation where these student athletes are getting paid NIL deals, it makes all the sense in the world to have the schools and the athletic personnel involved in it, because those are the folks who the NCAA can really hold accountable. They can't hold the collectives accountable. Only collectives can be held accountable if someone's going to sue them for breach of contract in a private lawsuit. They can be held accountable in the court of public opinion, but the NCAA does not have jurisdiction or authority over these collectives the way they do over the schools. So if we're trying to rein in these NIL deals and make sure that students are protected, and to use your words, there are adults in the room, it makes all the sense in the world to change the system and allow the schools and the athletic departments and the coaches to be in those rooms helping.
Right. I want to be clear. We don't know the facts, right? We just know what's been reported. It was reported that it was an assistant coach that made the promise. There's a collective on campus in a general sense, maybe not specifically to UNLV. What is the collective's responsibility in this? Or are they just the third party that no one can touch? So that's a nice buffer.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question becomes what's their legal responsibility, what's their ethical responsibility. I don't know. I mean, if you ask me, maybe call me naive. I think they do have an ethical and a moral responsibility to the players. And, collectives, for the most part, in my experience, they are formed by people who care about the program. They care about the kids in the program, and they come and they donate their money and they make these NIL deals from a very good place. Doesn't always work out that way. There have been issues. I'm recalling another story of a high school quarterback who was recruited and bounced from school to school to school because NIL promises were made by collectives and then they weren't, they didn't hold up. But, for the most part, collectives are trying to do right, and they should be trying to do right. They have an obligation to these students and these student athletes. From a legal perspective, though, they are pretty much outside the grasp of the NCAA. And unless there is a written contract that they breach, it's going to be hard to hold them legally accountable. What'll be interesting here, though, is to see what the fallout is for this particular collective and its pursuit in the future of other athletes for UNLV football or basketball or whatever sport it is. I think the reputation of that collective is probably going to take a little bit of a hit here, and maybe even the football staff, depending on what's being reported and what is believed. It'll remain to be seen how hard of a hit they take.
Yeah, I think you used the phrase court of public opinion. And I think right now it's probably pretty negative to both those entities. So let's go back to the next party in this story, and that is the student athlete himself or herself. Let's be generic about it. At what point should they have professional representation? Is there a dollar amount? Is there a level of school? For $100 deal, I'm hoping that you don't need an attorney. No offense to the attorneys out there, but this was reported to be six figures. 100,000 is what was reported. It seems like employing an attorney to review that contract or create that contract would make sense. I assume you agree with that.
Oh, for sure. And look, I'm not going to sit here and say every single NIL deal needs representation and needs an attorney. And I don't even know if there's a dollar amount I would affix to it. I think that would vary for different people in different situations. But here's what I do know. I do know this is a kid who moved all the way across the country for this opportunity in his last year of being able to monetize his football playing ability. He's an excellent college player. He's probably going to be going pro in something other than football. So this was his last chance to really monetize his ability. And there was a lot riding on this for him. And I hate to see what happened to him. I really, really do. He picked up his life. He moved across the country for his what he thought was going to be his last chance at a football payday. And certainly in those circumstances, with so much riding on it, I think it makes sense to have representation, whether it's an attorney, whether it's an agent, whatever it is, but someone to make sure you're protected so that you don't end up in this unfortunate situation where you've upended your life and now have to sit out an entire year of school and of football.
Yeah, it's a lose-lose situation. So you and I are singularly aligned. That's why we're doing this third or fourth podcast, whatever it is, and that is that we care about athletes, right? And we care about the future of college athletics and the power of athletics to change people's lives. And so, you know, there have to be some guidelines and guardrails put in. I don't think there's any question about that. We're in the midst of this review of the House versus NCAA legislation. At least what I read last week was that the second submission of guidelines was submitted, and some people's opinion is that will not be approved either. Can you give us an update as much as you can about where we are with House versus NCAA, and then relate it to some of the guidelines that are proposed and how this may not happen in the future?
Sure. So, as you mentioned, the House settlement, the proposed House settlement was submitted to the court in early September. The court held a hearing at which the judge expressed some concerns about the settlement terms. In fact, I think her words at the time were back to the drawing board. Now, I think that's a little bit of an overstatement. The criticisms she had were not to the overall structure of the settlement, but were more, secondary pieces and details. But nonetheless, she directed the parties to go back and renegotiate some of the terms, which they did. And then last week, on September 26th, the parties submitted the revisions to the court. I would tend to agree. I mean, I'm looking into my crystal ball here, and who really knows? I still think the House settlement gets done, but I'm not sure that the revisions they made are going to satisfy the judge and all of the concerns she had. It would not surprise me at all if she comes back and tells them to tweak a few more things. This judge, in my opinion, very much understands the gravity of this case, not just for the number of student athletes in the past who are going to be getting compensated out of it, but also its impact on the future. She gets it. She is dialed in on this. She's not going to let it go until she is 100% satisfied, as well she should be. So it wouldn't surprise me if there's a little bit more work to do there. Now, ultimately, I do think the settlement is going to get approved, and the broad strokes of it, the overall structure of it, will be largely unchanged. And that structure includes the ability for schools to revenue share with student athletes and pay them NIL money directly. And we've long said that once that is permitted, the NCAA is going to have to come out with some guidelines on how that's going to work, the guardrails for what schools can do, what they can't do, and perhaps what they have to do. And I think this case with the UNLV quarterback is really going to be a guiding principle for that, because this is something they absolutely have to avoid. And I think the rules that are going to come out of this will be designed to do just that.
Do you think the guidelines will come from the NCAA, or is this going to be Congress?
I think it's probably going to be the NCAA. Ultimately, I do think Congress is going to have to weigh in because of the Title IX component of it. Ultimately, we don't really know how these payments directly to student athletes are going to be treated with respect to Title IX. I think you're going to have different schools taking different approaches, and ultimately that's going to mean different courts and different lawsuits. And eventually, I think Congress will probably have to weigh in on that front. But in terms of the rules of the road, the guidelines for how member schools can and will operate in making these payments, it would not surprise me to see the NCAA take a first shot at some rules and some regulations on that. They may even be amendments to the existing bylaws.
So you think there will be an NCAA in 3 years, 5 years from now?
I do. I think that's kind of the thing underlying this whole House settlement is the NCAA's fear of not existing and its desire to maintain its relevance and maintain its position in what is an altered college sports landscape, but still one that it can have a role in. I do think that is the main reason, the main driver behind the NCAA being open under Charlie Baker's leadership to some pretty drastic changes to the way it does business. It's self-preservation. So I do think the NCAA is going to be around in 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, even 10 years from now, albeit under vastly changed circumstances.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of people listening that would say number one, too little, too late. Number two is good riddance, you know?
Well, here, you know what I say about the NCAA and the way they've handled this is pigs get fat, hogs get slaughtered. And they got fat for a long, long time. And if they had stopped there, they might have been okay. But they got a little too greedy. And this is what has come from that, unfortunately for them.
Yeah. While I have you, I want to go to another topic, which is fascinating to me, and that's the Reggie Bush story. Okay. And I'm sure that that's representative of lots of athletes whose name, image, and likeness is still used today in promo videos and in content by their school, by the NCAA. I was at the Reggie push Bush push game at Notre Dame, and he was a fantastic player, and he was an incredible athlete, and I really will never forget watching him play. We know what happened with the Heisman; it's been restored. But last week, it was reported that he filed a lawsuit seeking damages for the use of his name, image, and likeness with his alma mater, who just reinstated him, by the way, and I think retired his jersey officially. But what is, where are we at with former athletes coming back now and saying, where's mine?
So I think we're going to see more of it. I think we're going to see a lot more of it. Um, the House settlement does address some of it, but not all. Reggie Bush certainly preceded the class members in the House settlement. And we've seen some others as well. There were a couple of prominent football players who played on the University of Michigan teams who have brought a similar suit. I think you will see more and more and more of it, unfortunately. It's a difficult situation for the schools. And I think the House settlement is certainly going to help in one respect, but it won't give them full relief, as we're already seeing.
Who's liable? Is the school or the NCAA in the Bush case, for instance?
Well, the Bush case was brought against the school, against the university, and the university, the NCAA, and I believe also the conference. Who's liable to who? I can't say.
Yeah, crazy, crazy times. Anything else you want to share in the legal world of college athletics today? What else? I haven't been on social media today. What's happened? It changes
Yeah,
every day.
no, not much today. I mean, I think the situation with the UNLV quarterback is the one that's going to be most impactful. Not just because of him, but because I think we're going to see it happen more and more, unfortunately. I think you're going to see more and more players making these types of business decisions, whether it's leaving a team to preserve a year of eligibility, or something else. But you're a college football fan, Mark. I know you are. All you have to do is look at the top 25 in the AP poll, and you can see lots of examples of players, usually quarterbacks, who are playing their fifth year at a new school because they could get a lot of NIL money to go and do that. Just imagine a situation where you're a quarterback, and great college player, but probably not an NFL prospect. Why wouldn't you sit out and preserve that last year of eligibility, that last year of earning potential for your football ability, to try to go and either chase a national championship or chase a conference title, not to mention get a big fat NIL deal? There are a lot of incentives to do that. It's, as someone who played football and, loves the team aspect of it, it stinks in that regard. But at the same time, the players have to treat this as a business. Everyone else has been treating it as a business for so long. the players are entitled to as well. And if they have to make those types of business decisions for what's best for them and their families, you can hardly blame them.
Yeah, I agree. I'm certainly in favor of all of that. I'm just not in favor of a handshake deal on a supposed $100,000 deal. And, I think there's responsibility all around the athlete, the parents, the advisors, the collective, the school, the coaches, anyone that was part and parcel to this. Shame on them. And that's my take on things. Well, listen, Cal, I love the update. As this business and industry continues to evolve, we'll get you back on to give us the updates and your thoughts. Last question for you. I'm going to appoint you the NIL czar. What's the first thing you're going to do?
First thing I'm going to do if I'm the NIL czar, I'm going to let schools enter the NIL deals themselves. I'm getting rid of collectives to the extent I can, and I'm letting alumni who care about the programs donate to the school so that I can hold the schools accountable for those deals.
Yeah, that seems to make sense. I think that's great advice. Well, Cal, as always, thank you very much for your participation. We love your thoughts, your insight, and your wisdom on this subject in the ever-changing landscape of the legal side of NIL. Thank you for being a guest.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on, Mark. Always good to talk to you.
Okay.